of 1 week in order to convince them of a resounding victory. And that is the case study we need to look at. Assin, they use the same methodology, except that I think the pollster said that there were a lot of floating voters, and the floating voters were within the MPP strongholds, which means within the MPP right now, even their own people, there is apathy. And what is causing that apathy? So these are the things that we need to start talking about and analyzing and trying to extrapolate to make sure that if that apathy is nationwide, how are they going to be able to drum support for the general election that is coming in 2024?
I mean, pretty fascinating stuff. Let me throw this to you two politicians on Martin and then Menu. And let me start with you, Yao Menu. You heard there from George. George says that in the midterms in the U.S., I mean, they vote based on policy. I followed it. Sometimes it's on abortion. It's on a wide range of issues. But it appears that when it came to by-elections in Ghana, and in this particular instance, the Assin North by-election, there was really nothing about policy. It was just about how much noise which party can make and what message they could get in a way that could convince the voters. Is that something that you sense? That is what made you win in terms of getting more sympathy votes for Kweku, for instance? That led you to win this election, Menu. Is that something you would agree with? Hello, Menu. Well,
hello, Kweku, can I be heard?
Right. Martin, yeah, Menu, I can hear you now. I was asking, George just said that when it comes to midterms in the U.S., it's really based on policy. In by-elections in Ghana, like Assin, for instance, it's not really so much about policy and what the parties think they can do. And that, for instance, in this Assin North case, it was really just about some sympathy votes for Jachi Kweku. Is that a sense you get? And do you agree, being a member of the NDC, that had it not been for sympathy votes, maybe you'd have lost that seat?
Okay, thank you, Kweku. I think I will want to not to agree with that assertion that there was no message, and I mean this election was won purely based on emotions and some other behavioral factors. I want to say that this election was won, and it was a judgment of President Akufo-Addo's government. Why do I say this? Because, I mean, all the presidential aspirants had the opportunity to be at Assin North to communicate to the people what they have done to help the people. President Akufo-Addo had the opportunity to speak to the people. We had the Vice President, Mahmoud Bawumia, had the opportunity to engage the people. His Excellency John Dramani Mahama had the opportunity to equally engage the people. What these politicians or these actors were basically trying to do is that, hey, we've all had the opportunity to govern you before. This is what candidate Akufo-Addo, this is what President Mahama, when you had the opportunity, this is what we've done. Honorable Jachi Kweku, that we have presented to you, this is the man's commitment. The man's commitment is to serve his people. And I believe that generally that is the reason why people vote. People vote for representation. And they also vote based on quality of representation. And the people saw that quality of representation in Honorable Jachi Kweku. And also people saw that, I mean, over the time, in the last 6-7 years, President Akufo-Addo's performance has been abysmal. He always ran to find excuses why he is so reckless, inept. He has run this country so bad. And his excuses have been, I mean, from one issue to the other. He started by blaming everything on His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. Then COVID came to bail him out. And when COVID, people didn't want to hear the COVID story. Now he brought in the Russia-Ukraine war. And people realize that this president has always been just about excuses. And I mean, we are going into a very major elections. And some of us, I mean, in as much as we don't wish for some of these by-elections, at least it's a test of time. They say that coming events cast their shadows. And I am very confident that from this success from Assin North, some of the strategies that were deployed by the party, the NDC, and the overwhelming acceptance of the party, and also one key thing that is very important and significant in this conversation has been the performance of President Akufo-Addo. The president just came in, just to give a season. And he has not been able to translate the opportunity given to him, that is power, into making sure that the people who live in Assin North will get to benefit from the power that we have entrusted in the President Akufo-Addo's government. So,
I mean, let me take that to Martin. Martin, you are a member of the NPP. I mean, you quite follow this election religiously. You made a few social media posts of yours. I mean, Menu has suggested here that this election is a verdict on the NPP's performance in the last 2 years, especially.
Thank you so much for having me, Kweku, and a very good evening to all your listenership and to Menu and all those who are connecting this evening. For me, I would say that entirely you cannot. When you look at the parameters, you would be very, very falsifying the truth when you would say that this particular election is a verdict or a vote of no confidence in the performance of this government. It will be entirely wrong, and you fall flat on facts when facts are proven that indeed this election isn't the Assin North constituency is a constituency that you can be safe to say it is a die in the wool NDC. It is largely an NDC stronghold.
But Martin, can you really say so? Because the constituency since 1996, I mean, if you take out between 2000 and 2012 when it was carved out, it has been won by the NPP, Kennedy Japan. When the Assin North itself was carved out, one time it was won by the NDC, one time it had been won by the NPP. In fact, in 2020, before the NDC came, it was a seat that was held by the NPP, Madame Odua. So, I mean, can you really say that is a die-in-wool NDC seat which they simply won?
Okay. So, Kweku, let me physically open this matter for you. Before 2012 elections, when the Assin North constituency was created, before the 2012 elections, we had the entire constituency being Assin Central. So there's something we call political gerrymandering. Assin North is a product of political gerrymandering that the NDC saw the sense in creating or making out, delineating that particular constituency just because they felt the entire Assin Central would not be in their favor because of the strength of Honorable Kennedy Japan. He had a very strong foothold on that constituency. But however, even within the Assin Central, you had a section of the Assin Central constituency. In this case, I am talking before 2012. We have a section of the Assin Central constituency that largely voted for the NDC. Even in Bantama, you have certain sections of Bantama that vote for the NDC. Even in Hohoi, you have certain sections of that constituency that vote for the MPP. So the NDC, having been in power, thought that it will be very good politically for them to create or carve out Assin North from that constituency so that will be able to give them an additional seat in the National Assembly. This is as simple as that. It is politics. And we have known that since from 2012, the NDC has won that, from 2012, the NDC has won the election more times than the MPP. You cannot pick just one case out of it. For instance, in my constituency, the Yendi constituency, it's an MPP stronghold. And NDC has won that in 2008. But you cannot use such a case that NDC has been able to win it in 2008 to say that my constituency is a swing constituency. My constituency is a swing constituency. It's larger than an MPP stronghold. You probably can be able to zoom into the issues why the NDC won that constituency in 2008. You probably can be able to zoom into why the MPP won the seat of Assin North constituency in 2016. It's probably more than meets the eye. So, in this case, You cannot pick it from the superficial value and say that this particular by-election is a verdict on the performance of the Nana Akufo-Addo
of the
led
government.
MPP government. That
Okay.
cannot be so.
All
I
right.
would just say
Okay.
it is just one of NDC's constituencies, and it's one of NDC's one constituencies, and it is nothing new in the political scene.
Right. I mean, let me come to you, Karim. Martin makes some good points here about gerrymandering, and I think the data that we have mined here at Joy News, and if you look at the Assin North, it became Assin North in 2012. But before then, between 1996 up until 2012, it was the larger Assin Central before Assin North was carved out. 96, you can make an argument and say that, well, the NDC was still really the powerhouse when it comes to politics because, 1992, MPP boycotted the election. 96, the NDC won that election with 63%. But then, between 2000 and 2012, when the seat was divided, Kennedy Japan won it by an average of 55%. He won it almost all the time until NDC decided to carve that out. And they did so. And when they carved out for 2012 election, Ambre Samuel of the NDC won it by 51.6%. I know you've made a point already about how this can be a message and how this can also not be a message. But focusing on your point about how can this be a message, if this seat is really an NDC seat that they really are expected to win, then there can be no message really to the presidency or to NPP, and they do not have any cause to be concerned that this is a message ahead of 2024. He's right, is he not?
Well, again, my view on this would still be in the middle ground, sort of. Because if you are the NPP, obviously there's something to worry about. And then again, there's also the truth that the incumbents, by the logic of the Supreme Court, perhaps not. This obviously was a seat for the NDC. But one must ask themselves, what then accounted for, in this instance, the better performance by Mr. Kweku and the NDC than they had in the previous election that brought him in the first place? Given all the circumstances at play, and what obviously looks like a very legitimate threat that this person that you are electing, having already elected him before and almost entirely gotten nothing out of him because he had been in court fighting for his own life, and the possibility that he could also lose the criminal case against him and might go back to prison or go to prison, or even if he won, the procedural problems that we know that he would likely be subjected to may still affect his ability to work fully and all of that. In the face of all of that, if he still wins that election and wins it better than he did previously, then it raises questions for you in terms of how your own message, right, reverberated with people on the ground. And I say this particularly also because all things being equal, based on the strategy that the NPP adopted, among many other things, to get a candidate who was from the shares the same town with the incumbent, among many other things, and with all the problems that have been highlighted, one would have expected that if not for anything at all, they would close the margins better than they did in the previous election. So if you look at all of those things, there are pointers really to suggest that there is something else that is explaining why everything that you put in place here did not work. And I appreciate the distinction that you create between this and Kumewu, to say that Kumewu is predominantly for the NPP. But the practice of throwing everything that we have at a by-election is not a new practice. And in very many ways, and I think that's why even the NPP were very confident in themselves going into this election, everything pointed to the fact that they should have done better than they did. And for me, I'm not also very much interested really in this attempt to discuss what is good for the NPP, what is good for the NDC and all, because at the heart of it, while I appreciate that the problem of what looks like injustice really might have accounted a lot, and of course the sheer arrogance that attempted to look at citizens or voters as some stupid imbeciles who would just simply see a new AstroTurf, a couple of roads paved here and there, and jump to go and vote. While I do not celebrate any of that, I think it's also very important to recognize that within all of this context, right, there's a bigger problem to look at. And I would hope that all of us would learn a lesson from what Assin North have been able to show us, so that within the particular spaces that people find themselves in, right, so that if you are from Asante Achim Central, when the election comes and you're from the Konongo where I come from, you would not necessarily jump to go and vote for Honorable Anyimedu or whoever it is from the NPP simply on the account that, as for you, you're the NPP Chawafuma. That kind of nonsense is something that we need to guard ourselves against and be very clear. And for me, I've come to also really join the bandwagon on those who think that perhaps we should all begin to pray for bigger misfortunes to happen to our incumbent MPs, because it looks very clear to me that when they die, when something happens to them, like we are seeing now, they are able to mobilize themselves and do what they must by their own people. And those are the kinds of things that we need to be guarding against, so that the analysis is not really about instrumentalizing what you have seen and essentializing them to ask the questions that, is it necessarily about what would happen in 2024 or not? Because if this happens in 2024, who gains from what? Absolutely nothing. And so for me, I would be very interested that we also focus on the bigger picture and to interrogate and critically ask questions about the way we are doing our politics, and to say that this approach is just unsustainable and we must not countenance it at all quickly.
Musa, I want you to speak to that point that Martin makes. I mean, you did some polling research there. Did anything point to you at all that is a seat that the NDC could have won without much struggle?
No, in fact, when we did the poll in the first week of June, we actually saw that MPP candidate was leading James Chikwesi by almost 19% point. So it wasn't that obvious that anything was going to win the seat from the beginning. It wasn't until maybe the national campaign, whether in the campaign and took over the campaign, and they kind of put the candidate aside and took over. So, I mean, we saw clearly that it's not going to be an easy one. But I think towards the end of the campaign, things probably got out of hand for the MPP's candidate. And probably it was as a result of the things we were doing there, and people were really rejecting it. And that was probably why we saw the numbers like that. Now, to point out that if you look at the numbers that came through from Assin North, they have about 18 electoral areas. Usually, MPP would not lose plenty as they did. They lost 14 out of the 18 electoral areas. And that was really unprecedented in Assin North. So it showed that, yes, there is some kind of rejection of the government. I don't know whether it's as a referendum of the whole government or for the actions they were probably taking there. So that we are yet to find out. But definitely, it was a bit of rejection of the government per what we saw in the after the election.
Right. I mean, George, is it surprising that the ruling candidates, the ruling party's candidate was leading at some point in the polls, 19%, and then he actually loses the election?
No, it's not surprising. Again, usually at the early stages of polling, you get pretty much raw sentiments and people that are not engaged. The further the campaign goes, the more engaged people become, and then you can get a better view of it. That is how come I think Mr. Ibrahim said that based on the data that they gathered, as it got closer, they realized that this man is losing a percentage point a day. And the percentage point a day that was being lost might be due to a plethora of reasons. But again, I believe the apathy within the supporters of the MPP within that constituency should be what the MPP should be looking at. Because if that is blown up for the whole nation and it represents what is going on within the party, then the party has a problem ahead of 2024. Because again, I believe that economic hardship and things like that are in the country right now lends itself towards the opposition right now, because the opposition can point fingers at the incumbent all day long. So the incumbent has twice the task to do of convincing people that they are really doing something. And so if within your party there is apathy, as was said by Mr. Ibrahim, the pollster, then we need to look at that and understand the fact that if that small constituency is indicative of what is happening nationwide, then the MPP, I would say that if that holds true, then this was definitely a rejection of the Nana Addo's government. I am saying that the reason why I'm saying it is, one, if the apathy that was shown by the MPP within the MPP strongholds is a nationwide phenomenon, then definitely that can be used to say that, yes, this was just a clear-cut case of your policies and governance has been terrible, and for that reason, we are not going to even wake up and go vote for you, even though we ascribe to what the party and we say we belong to this party. So, go ahead.
Please finish that point for me.
No, so there is definitely something in there that needs to be looked at critically,
especially on the side of the
other
MPP.
Hand, yes, on the side of the MPP, I think the NDC clearly have shown within the last two by-elections, like I said, going into the Kumewu, where it is predominantly an MPP stronghold, they win about 70 or 60% almost every election, and still having to pull all of the muscle of the party in order for them to assure them of a win in Kumewu shows that there is something going on. And then to follow it up with MPP strongholds within Assin North not showing up, and like the last but one speaker said, that 14 out of the 18 communities, MPP lost it to NDC. It's definitely something that needs to be looked at. That means there is a bigger problem.
Right, bigger problem there. Martin, that would mean that you bottled that seat, right? In football terms, they will say you bottled it. At one point, your candidate led by 90% in the polling data that Musa Dankwa and his team were able to put together. And then in the places that you can call strongholds, you couldn't even turn out the numbers. So you bottled the election. Maybe in a minute before we do some social media comments.
Well, Kweku, let me tell you why the NDC has always gotten their data wrong. That is why I say that you largely cannot base your commentary and your conclusions on this particular election results. Way before, let me just stand back the clock. Before the very last by-election, before the 2016 election, was the Kalense by-election, when Honorable Robert, now His Royal Majesty Robert Nachina Mosori, ascended on the throne of Kalense. There was a by-election that was called. And in fact, Honorable Robert was an MPP member of Parliament. And when the by-election was called, the NDC's BT Baba won the election. Indeed, the NDC at the time thought that was a telltale for their 2016 victory, but it turned out not to be so. The data deceived them hugely on that front. What I'm saying is that when you tell me you cannot largely base your conclusions on its strongholds of the NDC, you can tell me that a by-election in Adenta, a by-election in Medina, a by-election in swing constituencies like Koro, Lejokuku, or Jomo in the western region, if such elections, such by-election in these constituencies can be able to be a real vote of no confidence or otherwise on any random government. But to conclude that a by-election in a stronghold of a political party is a verdict on a governing party, that you are getting it entirely wrong.
Let's do some social media comments, and then I'll come to the political actors around the table, Martin in particular and Meno, to share with us what this will mean really for 2024. James.
Join us now on Twitter, #Ghana Connect Live, Facebook, Joy 99.7 FM, or send us a WhatsApp on 0244 340 437, and we will call you back. Join the nation's biggest conversation now and connect to authority.
My colleague James Aveji joins me in studio. James, we have some interesting statistics, interesting numbers we are seeing on social media. First, on Joy News on Twitter, we asked the question: does the outcome of the Assin North by-election represent what could happen in the 2024 elections? What is the result?
Exactly. So if you look at the result, a total of 451 people partook in that poll. A staggering 67% are saying yes. It actually represents the performance of the government. That's some 302 people. Now, 77 people are voting no, representing 17%, and 72 are saying it is too early to call, representing some 16%. Now, if you go to the Joy FM Twitter page, a total of 634 people have voted in that poll so far. Yes.
Let me tell the question is the Assin North by-election a reflection of citizens' verdict on the performance of President
Akufo-Addo's government? The verdict from that poll is that 501 people are saying yes, representing 79% of the total number, and some 133 people are saying no, representing 21%. So if you look at the post from the two handles, a larger number, over 50% of the people are saying that yes, the verdict is actually reflecting the performance of government.
And what could play out in 2024. Interesting. Thank you very much, James. And some of the questions, the answers or the comments under the poll, among the 275 constituencies in Ghana, only the Assin North constituency has proven beyond reasonable that it is patriotic and love Ghana. This one says, well, Assin North is not the whole Ghana, so we cannot do that conclusion. This one, Abdullah Suleimana, says, it's more than that. If tribal politics is put aside, no one political party can toy with the people. Martin and Meno, I'll give you 30 seconds each. Okay, I've lost those gentlemen. Musa Dankwa, you have been doing some polling data. Let me give you the last word on this. You have been doing the data that you have. Does this point to a certain idea that 2024 something similar is going to happen from what we saw in Assin North?
In fact, we have been showing this for the past 15 or 16 months. Every 90 days, our poll shows that MPP is in big trouble across many of the swing regions. Central region is one, Western is another, Greater Accra is even worse. So what we are seeing in the polls reflects what we saw in Assin North.
Very, very, very interesting points there. But this is how we wrap up today on Ghana Connect. Very interesting perspectives shared by Karim, Martin, and Meno. We've also seen really interesting polls. The people who connected with us, Yao Meno, an NDC activist, Abdallah Martin, a former president of TESCON, Musa Dankwa, executive director of Global Info Analytics, George Poku joined us from US, and then Abdul Karim Ibrahim. Very interesting perspectives. Will this really show us what is going to happen in 2024? The talk is going to go on up until when we go into that election in 2024, and then we really see what could have happened. James Jachikwesen is now expected to be sworn in next week, Tuesday, in Parliament. He will take his seat in the chamber, and he will continue to do what he says is the work for the delegates and the constituents in Assin North. Thank you very much. My name is Kweku Asante. The Lacts are up next with Locker Room.